invisible zip you'll find in the back or in the side seam of a dress or in a skirt, and as its name suggests, you don't see it when it's zipped up. It's surprisingly very easy to fit a concealed zip like this, so let me show you how. Now this is what an invisible zip should look like. It's invisible, so you don't see it. And it's concealed inside the seam, so that all you're going to see is the slider bar at the top. And it's not as difficult as it looks if you have the right foot for your machine, and this is a foot for an invisible zip. And the way that it works is, as you're sewing in the zip, and this is an invisible zip, it unrolls the teeth, so you stitch very slightly behind the teeth, which means that the stitch line is very close to the edge, and when the teeth roll back again, then you don't see those from the outside. So this is how you do it. Well, this is my way of doing it, I should say. I've got my two pieces of fabric, and this is the only time when you sew a zip in that you don't part sew the seam to start with. And I find the easiest way to do it is to lay the fabric out right side up and then put the zip right side up in the centre, so I know which way it's supposed to be looking. What I'm then going to do is to mark my seam allowance on my edges with a pen that will disappear. Or you could use a pencil mark, or you could use chalk if that makes it easier for you. Or if you're very confident, you don't need to put the seam allowance there at all. So that's my exact measurement just down the side, like so. And then again, line those two pieces of fabric up together. That's the way that my zip's going to go. The easiest way to insert it is to start with your zip open, and then you'll fold the first side back onto that seam allowance like so. Line it up perfectly. Leave a little bit at the top, and normally I like to leave around about 1/4 of an inch from the top of my project because I don't want to see the top of the zip. That's going to fold over and will encompass something like a hook and eye or a waistband. So I'm just going to put lots of pins down the one side, then I'll pin the second side, and then I'm going to sew that by hand just with a long tacking stitch to hold it in place. So there we go, right down to as far as I can with the zip. That'll do. And then for the second side, you'll need to flip this over, but again it's easier to see with your fabric face up and your zip face up where that zipper's going to sit. So fold that over again so that the teeth are lined up with the same distance from the top of your fabric, and again pin that across. This is where it helps putting the line on first, I think, because you know that you've got an exact straight line. Because remember, when you turn this over after you've sewn the zip in, we don't want to see any of the teeth. We want the seam to be very neat and very straight. Now this looks a little bit awkward when you get down to the slider, but you know that you've got it in the right way around because you laid it out properly to start with. And that's how the zip's going to sit. So the next thing I'm going to do, so that I don't distort the shape when I'm sewing over with my machine, is tack all of this by hand, making sure again that those teeth are lined up with my line, and then I'll take all of the pins out and we'll sew it in. So that's what my zip looks like now. It's just tacked into place. I've gone all the way around by hand. The next thing to do is take that over to the sewing machine and start to sew with my invisible zipper foot. So I've got 2 grooves underneath the foot. The widest part of the foot needs to be over the tape of the zip, so I'm going to put this into the left hand groove, and I'll just put the needle down to secure it. As you're sewing, and do this quite slowly, you'll need to unravel or unfold the teeth as you're sewing. Now if your zip won't unfold very easily, some schools of thought recommend that you put a light iron over that beforehand. This one I don't think is too difficult, so just get my foot pedal and we'll have a go. So again, take it slowly. You can see the teeth opening up and just guiding through that left hand section of the foot means that the needle goes just underneath the teeth, and this is what makes it invisible. And take that as far down to the slider as you can. And one quick back stitch to hold that in place. Take that away. And then do the same on the other side. And remember, the widest part of your zipper foot needs to be over the tape, and then pull back those teeth and guide it through the foot. As close to the slider as I can, and again a quick back stitch, and then take that out. Next thing to do is to change the foot on your machine. We've finished with the invisible zip foot, whoops, so we're going to put on the regular zip foot. And this time I'm just going to sew the top of the tape of the seam to the inside of my fabric. Not so you see any stitches on the outside, but just to secure that in place across the inside of the seam of my fabric. Quite close to the edge, and I can use quite a long stitch because this is just to hold the zip in place. And normally if this were a garment you were sewing, the edges of your fabric you'd probably want to overlock or serge, and or turn those over, or even just use your pinking shears to neaten that off. That side out of the way. Like so. Now I take out my tacking stitches, but I'll do that later on. But the next thing to do is to finish off the seam that I've left open where I first started. So I'm going to do my zip up. You can see how that's invisible. Turn my fabric over, fold the zip over together, and then I'm going to sew my seam with a smaller stitch, I think, all the way up to where my zip started here. Now your seam allowance, I'd allow a little bit more than the usual, so cut your fabric that little bit wider. It makes it easier to put a zip in. I'm tucking the ends of my zip just out of the way and just sew straight up to the line where I first started sewing, and back tack. And then you'll need to press. But there's my zipper foot. I need to take those tacking stitches out. Whoops. Should use scissors. So just take away those loose threads. Take the tacking stitches out later. But you can see where you undo the zip. That's going to be pressed in a second. Should just blend into where your seam starts. So when that's folded back, when it's zipped up, sorry, and when it's pressed, you don't see the zip at all.